Thank you very much, Governor. We have two pads right here. Anybody that's got any burning desire, questions, or comments, and we run out of time, write them down. We want to capture everybody's thoughts. So agree, disagree, rebuttal. Go ahead and scratch those down. Our next speaker, what we've wanted to do from here is just a quick review of the 2015 symposium, and then get into the why of monitoring, and then start getting into reviewing the data. So with that, Mike Hillis from ERG is going to present a brief review of the 2015. Mike Hillis was a biologist for the Forest Service for 34 years. For the last 10, he's been a senior biologist with ERG. Mike has authored many Region 1 papers on lynx, flammulated owls, northern goshawks, and timber restoration strategies. With that, Mike will go ahead. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon. Some provocative thoughts in that discussion from the former governor, which I think you'll see that we'll have an opportunity to come back to many of those. Maybe by way of starting, a lot of you were here in 2015. We covered a lot of topics. We reviewed recent research and monitoring from people like Steve Slater and Jason Carlisle, Bob Oakleaf. We identified some gaps in the research, which we've had a lot of discussion in that 2-year period. We spent a lot of energy on reviewing NEST data collected by various organizations, identified a lack of consistency, which certainly complicates our ability to deal with a lot of issues that have already been discussed, and identified some serious challenges for data storage, retrieval, infrastructure, funding, and all of that stuff. Just to review some of those kind of cool things that we talked about, these are some things with alternative nest structures and ferruginous hawks. Mostly, I think, remember the stuff that Jason Carlisle shared on a species-by-species assessment of both looking at disturbance or response of individual raptors to various disturbances. These are some things from the Wyoming ferruginous hawk projects. So pretty cool stuff. Some of the comments we got were really responsive to some of those issues that came up. For instance, we need standardized peer-reviewed survey data. Need to think about a stakeholder investment to address some of these issues. There should be more outreach regarding or sharing of data between organizations and companies. Clearly, we need a centralized clearinghouse for data. And then Gary Beauvais stepped and said, well, wind already has a process to address some of those things. So I'll share Governor Mead's comments here briefly.
Then would be, do we want energy or do we want a clean environment? It's a false question. The fact is we want a clean environment, we want healthy habitat, we want pride in the fact of the way we take care of species in this state and beyond. And
So despite the fact that there's a little bit of angst in how you do all that, that's a pretty cool message. And I guess, that's been reiterated a couple of times now, but certainly want to keep that in mind. Some of the next steps that were identified at the end of the symposium 2 years ago were that certainly we need to look at region-wide prey density data, need to address is energy development affecting occupancy, standardized data collection. I think we've nailed that in terms of making some serious progress, which we'll talk about today. Nest to territory data collection database, again, one we certainly made serious progress on. Alternate nest structures as a mitigation tool. Certainly there's stuff being done with that. And certainly more research partnerships with industry and more outreach. And I think in the 2 years since then, we've made some serious progress on that. Gwen and Andrea and a couple of ERG folks spent a lot of energy talking about goals and objectives for this symposium. And I'm going to paraphrase the heck out of this just for time, but certainly we're here to maintain or improve protection of raptors while minimizing economics on energy extraction. Several of the commissioners have already voiced that, and we've agreed that, yeah, that's an important step. That requires good data and good science, and no debate there whatsoever. Determining whether data is good enough to answer questions, or if not, what do we need to collect to make it acceptable? Certainly, that's a step that's going to be with us in the months and years ahead. Scientific community generally doesn't write policy, but they provide the data that shapes policy. And so it's important to both kind of understand what kind of management questions are out there that might reflect that data needs, so that that data is able to eventually answer some of those questions. And those questions are going to change. And we're working together as a community, blah, blah. We obviously have a strong commitment to do that. So what to expect in the 2017 Symposium. We'll talk about the why of data that's collected, both in terms of what's needed from a biological standpoint, as well as what's required by different agencies or organizations. And Gwen will kind of share a panel discussion on that. We'll review the data standard collection. A lot of you guys invested a lot of energy after the 2015 to address that. We'll discuss the progress in the centralized database. Gary will share with us some information on that. Perhaps as importantly, we'll talk about some future questions that centralized database might allow us to discuss. And this is where you kind of have to crystal ball a little bit. What are the management questions that are going to evolve in the years ahead, and how can we both modify data collected to address that and have the necessary models or infrastructure to do that. Review some of the models being developed. For instance, Golden Eagles will talk a little bit about habitat modeling using remotely sensed data, provide the policy context in which raptors are managed, review some collaborative efforts for managing raptors across ownership boundaries, review some successes with moving nests, and lastly, discussing mitigation effectiveness. So no question about it, there's going to be new issues are going to come up that weren't raised in 2015, and we'll have an opportunity to develop strategies to do that. There may be some old issues that didn't get resolved in the past 2 years, and we'll have another crack at those if you guys want to go there. Without a doubt, we'll identify some tasks and tweak or revise our strategy where necessary. So does that sort of work for everybody? Is that kind of what everybody was expecting? Again, pretty focused. This doesn't appeal to everyone. These are basically resolving ongoing issues that are very, very specific to energy in Wyoming. So with that,